Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first session for our Spring of Code program. Today we have Mir from GNU Octave, and he's going to be talking to us more about contributing to that. But before that, can you introduce yourself?
Me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so Nir Krakauer. I'm happy to be the first one presenting. I didn't realize I thought there would be other people before me about Google Summer of Code. So I'm the coordinator for one of the Google Summer of Code projects of GNU Octave, which I'll talk more about. And I'm also a professor of civil engineering at the City College of New York in the US.
That's awesome. So we can get started with the questions. And do you want to share the slides?
Yeah, I guess I can give a short presentation, and then I'll be happy to answer questions people have.
Okay, awesome. So before we get started, would you mind sharing a little bit about the organization that you're representing?
Absolutely, that's my first slide, in fact.
Awesome.
Octave is a programming language and environment for numerical and scientific applied math sorts of applications. So a lot of data analysis and visualization capabilities. It's been around for about 30 years, since the 90s, and it's been getting improved and revised over the years. It's not a big project. It's in pretty much all volunteer group of contributors. So we've been happy to have the Summer of Code students involved, and some of them have continued being involved in our organization after Summer of Code. Octave is a MATLAB clone in the sense that it's intended to be able to run code that's written from MATLAB. So it provides a free software environment where this code base can be used. And therefore, part of our development efforts are making it more compatible with MATLAB, which is a moving target because MATLAB also changes. And adding any capabilities and extra libraries that users also find necessary. So should I continue? Or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I can do that. So Octave has been in Summer of Code since 2011, both in Google Summer of Code and the European Space Agency Summer of Code, which has also happened in several of those years. We've had about 38 students so far over the years. But the projects have resulted in a lot of valuable improvements to our code base and some new features. We've had students either becoming mentors in future years or presenting at our conferences about their work. And we have a full list of the past projects as well as some proposed projects for this year in our wiki, which I'll give the link of at the end.
Okay. So what are some of the types of projects that you have? Can you talk a little bit more about some example or something?
Yeah, so again, there's a full list in our wiki, but here's a few of the topics. So, for example, we have a number of solvers for differential equations, and some of those need to be improved. We would like to support a table format that includes columns of data that are of different types, and that can display those in nice ways. There's some image file support for TIFF files that we would like to improve. We have an interface of Octave to Python called Pythonic, and that requires some attention. One project is for bringing Jupyter notebooks to Octave in a more native way. So these are some examples.
So how can beginners get started with contributing? Because I'm sure people that are joining Google Summer of Code or just want to contribute to Octave in general might be at different levels in their coding journeys. So if there's a beginner that is really interested in this organization, do you have any tips or any resources on how they can get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're a beginner, then the best thing to do is just to start using Octave and see if it works for the kinds of problems that you have. If you're in a science or engineering program, you probably will find that it is useful for doing a lot of your classwork. And so Octave is already packaged for most Linux distributions, and there are also Windows and Mac versions available. There are help and maintainers email lists that you can join. So the help one is more for either beginners, but not necessarily. It can be people who use Octave and who have questions about how to do something. The maintainers list is for discussion on how to improve Octave and what features come next.
Right.
And there are also chat and discourse channels that can be used to ask questions or have discussion more informally about Octave. So once you start using Octave and you have some questions, you should feel free to interact through those channels. There's documentation and tutorials for Octave, both on the Octave website and on the Octave wiki. I'll put the links at the end, and you could consider extending those so you can see what wasn't explained well enough to you as a beginner, and try to explain it better. If you see any bugs, like so whether those are things that aren't giving you a wrong answer or features that are missing, for example, the MATLAB has, you can report them. You can fix bugs. We have a lot of open bugs that you can fix. And you can contribute patches, which are adding and extending Octave's capabilities in a way that doesn't fall into a bug fix. And then finally, again, you can start some larger project within Octave or take part in one once you have a bit more experience. And again, the Octave wiki has a list of ideas that people have proposed for projects.
That's awesome. Thank you. So is there anything else you would like to cover?
So let's see what else I had. So I talked about Octave and Summary of Code. Talked about some of the potential other topics. So Google Summary of Code, well, the format has changed this year. Now it's shorter than before, half the length.
Right.
So, but essentially it's going to be a half-time job that would be over the summer. And it's about 20 hours a week on the new format. And so for students who are applying for that, the application period will be starting at the end of March, beginning of April.
Yes.
You'll have a couple-week application window. We're looking for people who have experience and interest in using Octave. So because it's a short program, right, we're not going to be able to get you started within the program. We'd want to have people who are already involved. In addition to knowing Octave, you need to know the topic you're proposing to work on, whether it's, let's say, differential equations or plotting or databases, right, within Octave. So we'd be looking for familiarity with that topic, and again, being able to pick up the methods that you'll need to do your project within this short time frame. And part of that will be having a proposal that has details about what methods you'll use and how long you expect each step to take. And one way to gauge both of those is whether you've contributed previously to Octave in the form of bug fixes and patches, even small ones, that will really make an application a lot longer if you're already an Octave contributor.
Right. So if any of you all watching are interested in contributing to Octave, then I think this is the right time right now to start getting a little familiar with it and understand the language and understand the organization.
Absolutely. And I would say, these tips are more or less going to be applicable to other organizations too. Different organizations, of course, can have might be different in detail, but in general, I think there's a lot of commonality.
Right.
So if you're interested in another organization for Google Summary of Code more, then learn more about that organization and see if you can contribute, starting interacting with people that might be mentoring for that organization.
Mm-hmm. I think there's one more slide.
Yeah, and this just has my website, email address. You can also add me on LinkedIn. And the Octave homepage and wiki, and there's also an aggregator for student blogs, so you can see some of the students who've worked on Octave in the past years and what their experience has been through their blogs.
Everyone, feel free to take a screenshot if you need to refer to it later. So I think we can move on to some questions. I see there are quite a few questions in the comments. This is the first one. Can I join Octave for free, and what are the advantages of joining it?
So Octave is free software, so it's going to be available generally for free. You can just download it. Again, it's used for numerical and scientific computing applications. There are a lot of tutorials. So if you go to the wiki, there'll be links to some books and videos and shorter tutorials about using Octave. So you can try it out. Let's look at some of the tutorials and see if it works for what you're interested in doing on a computer.
Okay. Next one. How is Octave better than any Python library?
So obviously Python can also do basically the same things Octave can do. Octave is simpler, I would say, syntactically than Python because it's more optimized for numerical computing. Python is a general purpose computing language, right? So it can be used for any kind of programming. Octave is more for specifically working with numbers and matrices, right? And so it's you can do those things in Python too, but you'll need to add different libraries, and the syntax is not as simple as Octave because Octave is more geared towards specifically scientific computing. So it's just a matter of preference, I would say. You can try both and see which one works better for you. Yeah, you can certainly contribute. So again, I would say install Octave and start using it. Look at some of the tutorials, and then you can look at some of the project ideas, bug reports, right, and see if any of those interest you in terms of looking at them more deeply. So Octave's basic code is built in C++ primarily. We also have a lot of programs that are written in Octave's own language. We don't use Python as for our code, although we have an interface to Python where you can call Python routines within Octave.
I think we'll come to that in the next question, which is what tech stack is used in Octave?
Yeah, so again, it's primarily C++, and we use Mercurial or HG for version control, which is a bit not as widely used as Git, but not very different from Git. It's not a big deal to switch from one to the other. And we have a little bit of Fortran and shell scripts and such here and there, but mostly C++ as far as the underlying code for Octave for basic functions. And we'll link to built-in libraries like BLAS and LAPACK.
I think we kind of covered this, wherein if you start probably getting familiar with it now and start contributing now, there's still kind of enough room for you to still familiarize yourself with it and apply to it when the application's open.
Exactly, yeah. So it just depends on your level of motivation and interest in terms of how long you're going to take not to be a beginner, right? That's not something I can tell you. We don't have a specific time frame, but you can start using Octave, and if you don't feel like you're ready to contribute this year, right, you can always apply next year, for example.
Again, I think this is covered, but if you want to address it once again.
Well, for contributing,
According to
we're happy. According to, oh, okay, so it just depends on the situation. Again, so it depends on what kind of technology, in terms of the language, say C++ or Octave itself, and also the topic, right? So if it could be a numerical function, or a function which is involved, which relates to some physics equation, right? So we might have to have some familiarity with it to be able to make a good contribution. But just depends on what specifically the issue is that you might be contributing to. We have a little bit of Java interface for Octave, for example. We use Java libraries for reading spreadsheets in the I/O package for Octave, as an extension to Octave. But overall, Octave doesn't have much to do with Java.
I think this is a concern that most people have, that they might not be able to cope up with the production level code. So I think this is a very good question.
Yeah, and the advantage with a free project like Octave, right, is that all the code is available for anyone to look at, right? So you can see how the functions which Octave has now are designed, and what kind of syntax and say checks and tests they have, and you can join the maintainers group and chat channels to get a sense of how maintainers think about writing code. So it's true that it's different, right? But that can be educational, right, in terms of giving you real life experience, and something you can pick up if you interact with Octave or another project over a period of time.
Thank you.
What do you mean by first issues?
They probably mean some beginner friendly or some beginner friendly issues.
Yeah, so if you go to the wiki, there's a short projects page, which is intended to be ones that beginners might have an easier time with doing. But again, you need to have used Octave and have some idea of how it works before you're likely to be able to start contributing. It's just a process.
So the next question, I think what this means is we covered all the tech stack and what languages are used, but they probably just want to know which one is more preferred or which one is heavily used.
Yeah, so again, so Octave in particular is built on C++, and that uses a different Octave specific C++ features are the libraries that we have in C++. And I think that's something that you'll pick up if you start using Octave or start using another software package, and then start looking into the code and seeing how it's built. Yeah,
I think
no, it's a good question. So one thing you can do is just to file a bug report, right? So we have a bug tracker, and so that way people can look into the error you found, and you can look at the bug report, see if maybe it's already been reported before, so you can search it first, but then you can file a bug report, and then people can look into it and maybe give you more guidance or as to what the matter is. And you can also look at the code base. So in Octave, there are functions that will give you the path to the program that you're running at a given time. and you can look at the code for that program if you want and see what might be going on with it.
So moving on to the next one.
So Octave is a volunteer project. In principle, like you could find, if you find somebody to pay you to develop Octave, that's fine. There's certainly people whose employer is paying them to work in Octave because that is relevant for their application that they're working on. But in general, Octave is a volunteer project, and all of us are volunteers working for Octave. So, if you're looking for a employment, that's not necessarily the most direct path. And we don't provide certificates in particular, although, if you're a Google Summer of Code, you can get a certificate from Google that you're part of the Summer of Code and you finished successfully.
So I think there are a lot of resources online, and Code for Cause might also be helping you out with this. But other than that, if you have any in mind.
Exactly, yeah. And so there'll be a lot of resources in general about C++, and for Octave in particular, if you go to the Octave wiki, there'll be some pages about Octave's particular C++ features and style. So you could look at that once you have some familiarity with C++ as a language.
Any opportunity for merge stack?
What's that?
That is MongoDB, Express, React, Node.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not familiar with it, so likely not.
I'm not sure if your question is particularly for Octave or open source in general, but if it is for Octave, then if you want to address it.
Yeah, I would say in general for open source and for Octave also, there's some ideas about etiquette, so how to go about approaching a problem. We have some of that in the Octave wiki, but say in the guidance to Summer of Code applicants. But maybe your organization also provides some kind of tutorials. But basically, there's a kind of etiquette about using the program and and trying to figure out a question yourself before you ask it. Doing some research. Again, recognizing that people are volunteers and they have a limited amount of time to help you. So trying to not impose on them, more than you need to, but on the other hand, to also become involved and do make yourself part of a community, but in a not too annoying way. But overall, I think people can just go ahead and get involved in most cases. Yeah. So Octave's repository. Let me see if I can find it. I'll post it in the comments. Can I post it in the comments?
You can send it on the chat. I'll post it in the comments.
Okay.
I think this is a very good question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You can contribute to Octave at any time. Again, I would say the steps would be to start using Octave, and then as you can look at the contribution guidelines in the wiki, and then as you have questions or ideas for things you might want you're not sure about, or things you might want to add to Octave, you can ask about them in chat or in a mailing list, and start interacting that way. Or you can just post what you did as a bug fix or patch.
Right. So they can be joining the Discord community and all of that as well, right? If they're just contributing.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So again, people working for Octave are volunteers, so it's just a matter of joining. You don't have to pass any screening to be a volunteer. Well, you can still use Octave if you find it helpful, and if you find bugs, you can report them. You don't need to know programming to report a bug. If you find something that's not working the way you think it should, and then you can improve the documentation, right? So again, if you see something in Octave that's not clear or not explained well, you can write a tutorial about it. And that would be helpful also to bring more people in to use Octave.
Right. And also, it doesn't matter if your contribution is small or you made a small bug fix, because I think Code for Cause stands by it. The size of your contribution does not matter. It only matters that you contributed. So in the beginning, you cannot expect it to be a very impactful contribution as well. So it's okay if you make minor contributions and bug fixes and all of that, and slowly progress towards bigger and impactful contributions.
Yes, I agree. So essentially, you want to include what your goals will be for the midterm and final evaluations. Right? So Summer of Code has these midterm and final evaluations. You can see the details for this year in Google's site. So that's when you're going to be evaluated for how well you did compared to what you proposed at the beginning of the project. So your proposal needs to have clear goals so that you can be evaluated, assuming your proposal is accepted. And of course, those can be modified as if necessary during the summer, if sometimes things change. But we'd like to see having a clear sense of what you'll do and what your goals are in the proposal.
Again, I think this has been covered, but yes.
Yeah, as far as languages go, that's enough. And then you might also need to, depending on which aspect of Octave you're contributing to, you might need to understand the subject matter that the program is about.
Next one's not a question, but a comment I want to address. It's okay if you're a beginner, and no questions are bad questions. All questions are good questions.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with these questions. Different people will have different questions depending on their level, and that's okay.
The link has been posted. Yeah. That's the repo you can start contributing to.
Yeah, in principle, you could just fork the repo and do things to it. And again, there's also a bug tracker and patch tracker, which was a better place to, if you have a specific contribution, then if you put it there, people will look at it.
Any more questions? Please feel free to post them in the comments. Okay. Is data structures and algorithms necessary for contribution?
Algorithms are pretty important in Octave because a lot of what we do is writing better or more stable, more general algorithms for solving specific problems. Data structures is also important for some parts of Octave, not for everything, but in some cases, it's important to be able to manipulate structures of certain types that might arise in a particular problem. So it's an important class, I would say. Maybe it's not necessary for everything that you might contribute, but something useful. I think we covered this before.
Right. Is there anything specific other than the language and data structures, like anything about the organization or something else? Or maybe a math class, maybe linear algebra or calculus, something like that.
Yeah, linear algebra will be very helpful because Octave's core functionality has to do with linear algebra and interfacing with linear algebra libraries. numerical methods or numerical computation class would certainly be very helpful. Differential equations might also be another class that would be helpful, especially numerical methods for differential equations.
Very true. Do you have anything?
Yeah, so Octave has a graphic user interface, and we produce plots of different kinds. So those can be improved in different ways. So those are also possible project areas.
Can we contribute in DevOps? Again, I think the tech stack and everything has been clear. So also outside of that, you should probably take a look at the repository.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can use an environment you want to do your programming.
Right.
Yeah, so again, you can start by just using the program, or it's using to be user, not a contributor at first. And then again, you can start either by finding some bug that you can report, so you don't have to know the code base for that, or you can find something that's more small and self-contained that you can work on.
Also, a lot of people have been asking, how do you start contributing to open source, and you don't know much about contributions, so that's completely fine. Like mentioned in the comments, we'll be having separate sessions to teach you exactly that. But for now, please try and focus over here and ask him more questions related to the organization and contribution to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine if they're also general open source questions.
Right.
Yeah, so it depends on what quality your contributions are, right? So you want to be making people feel like you're that your contributions are valuable rather than bothersome, right, to deal with. So again, you might need to take some time to use the program and read some of the documentation and look at some of the wiki pages, just to become more familiar with how it works and how people are approaching it. So I don't know about your specific case, but so it might work starting to contribute and then being selected, or you might need to spend more time just using the program and Octave and getting more experience with it. So it depends on the topic, but the different kinds of numerical methods that Octave uses. So for example, I was involved in a project a few years ago for improving implementations of things like the gamma function in Octave. So we had to look at different series that to approximate the gamma function and figure out which ones are accurate on the different ranges of inputs. Essentially, the different any kind of math which you can do computationally might be in Octave somewhere, or could be a candidate for including in Octave. So it just depends on your topic.
Right. No, not specifically from Octave, but you'll be getting a Google Summer of Code certificate if you participate through that. But I think the question is, a lot of people are interested in contributing without the GSoC program, and this is probably for that. Will they get a certificate?
Yeah, so we don't give certificates, but I would say more important than a certificate, right? If you have a
Right.
say a GitHub page, right, or whatever, where you can show your contributions to Octave or to some other open source projects, that's something that'll be more impressive. You can put in your resume more than just having a certificate, which doesn't necessarily mean much.
Absolutely. I think that's a very important point that it doesn't matter to get more and more certificates. It just matters how much did you actually contribute. And I think most recruiters or companies, wherever you want to submit your certificates, will be checking your GitHub pages and they'll see your contribution graph. So that should be good enough. One more question. Yeah, very good question.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, not always, but it's partly a matter of developing a feel for how the software and how this scientific computing software in general works. Right. So once you have been using it for a while, then you might get a sense for how something should work without going through all the documentation. But as a beginner, you might want to go through the documentation more just to make sure you're not missing something that is would considered basic by somebody who's been using it for a while. But I would say don't worry too much about it, because the worst case, if you say something that is something a beginning would say on the help mailing list, that's not the end of the world. So just do your best to understand the problem, but if not, you can always ask for help.
Do you have any tags that could be helpful in noticing beginner friendly issues?
Well, HG is Mercurial, so it's its own project. It's a version control system. So you can try using it, learning about it, but that's not so much part of Octave. It's just one of the background tools that Octave uses. So I'll post a link here about Mercurial that you can learn more about how to use it and how it's used in Octave. Okay, yeah. So good question. So Octave is affiliated with the GNU project, primarily that just helps us get process funding and do paperwork. But there are many different projects which are part of GNU. So GUIX is one of them. So there's really nothing nothing shared between Octave and GUIX, like two different projects, but they happen to be both part of GNU. But as far as the people who are actually running them, they're just different people, and they're different projects.
Yes, there will be.
Well, we have some projects that might involve using HTML in Octave or generating HTML from Octave. It's not at the core of what Octave is, right? So Octave is more about data processing and applied math. So it's not so much about web design, but it does have an interface to different web functions. So it's possible there might be a project that use HTML or CSS. So if you look at our wiki, there are going to be different. There's a list of different applications that Octave has been used for. Essentially, let me see if I can find that first. I'll post that link.
Sure.
So essentially, Octave is a language for numerical programming that might be useful, especially for science, engineering, applied math kinds of use cases. You can support things like solving differential equations for, say, structural or electronic applications. It can support interfaces to lower-level electronics like Arduino. It can support financial math and computations. So it has a range of things it might support, but basically it says scientific numerical computing areas. So I would say you can join the existing channels for the emails and chats. And then, if you want to, say, improve your social media presence or something of that sort, you can do that. But I would say, first become familiar with some of the existing channels and meet some of the people that are working on Octave now.
They mean do Octave volunteers help?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, I would say, we'd expect people to read some of the documentation, because again, we're all volunteers. So we might want to help everyone, who's a beginner, but we probably won't have time. So I would say yes, to some extent, but again, just general etiquette about interacting with open source projects and learning how to ask good questions, maybe something that you'll cover more in this series. I'm not actually sure. I think it's a historical reason that Mercurial was more common when this when the Octave repository was being designed, which was some years ago. But again, the two are not very different from each other, the version control systems. Either way, so you could directly solve the issue and then post a patch or bug fix, or you can say, I want to solve this issue. Do you have any ideas? So depending on perhaps on how bold you are, you can do either approach. Yeah, it's certainly useful. Octave is kind of a different language than Python, but there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of things that are going to be similar in both. So certainly, the more languages you know, the better for contributing to open source projects. Yes, it's a version control system, so it's the same category as Git. There are a few differences in syntax and so on, but you can think of it as being basically the same.
So, do you have any Telegram channel?
I don't think there's a Telegram channel, but I would say something you can post on a mailing list about whether there's a Telegram channel, and if not, you can offer to start one.
Tips for remaining consistent.
Okay, well, I mean, for learning about and using and contributing to Octave, you don't need to be consistent. I mean, you could just do it whenever you feel like it, or whenever a problem arises that Octave will help. I mean, if you're working on a job or even on summer of code, then you do need to be consistent. Otherwise, you probably won't be, looked well on by your employer. But that's another issue. But as far as contributing to a project, you can do that whenever. What is TDD?
Yeah, I'm not sure what is TDD.
Oh, it's probably like test-driven development.
Testing.
Actually,
Yeah.
Actually, that is a good issue that you brought up, because Octave does have tests for each function, or we try to have tests, but there are actually a lot of functions which don't have tests, especially smaller ones. And one of our goals is to add tests to all of our functions, to better test our code base and make sure it's working properly. So one thing you could do actually is to add tests to existing functions. So that can be a good way for beginners to start. Machine learning.
Yes.
So the machine learning algorithms can be coded in Octave, and we have some development of machine learning functions in Octave. And in fact, that could be a good topic for a summer of code project to improve the machine learning support in Octave. But I mean, Octave is not necessarily designed to be the most efficient software for doing something, right? So it's not necessarily going to be what you would choose to do your very large scale machine learning application, but it can be very good for prototyping and trying out different versions of a machine learning algorithm. And again, that's an area that we could probably support better in Octave. So that could be a good area to contribute to once you learn about Octave.
I personally don't think there's any fixed time to start contributing. You can contribute right now at this moment as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say, start again, if you haven't used Octave, then start using it and look at some of the documentation. And once you've done that, you're welcome to start contributing. You just find something that you can contribute to.
When was it first released?
Octave has been around since about 1992, so it's been around for a while. And we keep releasing new versions about once every year or two. So now we're at version 6.2 or 6.3. So there's a list of short projects. Let me post a link to that might be more suitable for beginners.
Yeah, sorry.
And you can also look at our bug tracker. Let me post the link to that also, and see what sorts of bugs there are, and maybe see if some of those are ones that you can work on. So let me post that as well.
So the links are put in the comments. So,
So again, yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. So if you go to the wiki, there'll be so maybe I'll copy that as well. So there'll be the links to the channels that Octave currently uses. So there's a channel on Discourse. And and there's a web chat channel. So you can use either of those. And again, there's also the email lists. I tend to just look at the mailing lists and not look at the channels very much, but different people have different ways they're comfortable communicating. Yes, that will definitely help. So again, so Octave is best known for being used in the big Coursera machine learning courses. That's probably how most people have gotten exposed to it in recent years. So that definitely helps. And then, so again, you can look at what are some of the bugs and project ideas and see if you want to work on any of those.
And all the links that we have been putting in comments will be added to the description later on. So don't worry, feel free to come back and check the video for the links.
Yeah, so absolutely. So if you, so Octave has a signal processing and communications that they're called packages, which are add-ons to Octave. So you might want to look at what those have. There's actually also a list on the wiki about missing functions in those packages. Which compared to MATLAB's equivalent. So you can see if you want to work on any of those, for example, you might be able to find somebody who's more familiar with writing code that you can collaborate with, although you want to have some self-familiarity yourself, most likely.
Okay, so any more questions? Yeah.
Yes. So so if you're contributing to GNU Octave, then you can say you've been contributing again to this to this free software that is used by hundreds of thousands and millions of people. And depending on what you did, like you'll include your contributions in your repository, GitHub page or whatever, and you can summarize in your resume what you did, right? So maybe you worked on, let's say, adding more communications to signal processing or machine learning tools in Octave, right? So you can highlight that in your resume. So it just depends on what you did, right? But whatever you did, you can include in your resume.
So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Nir. Do you have any closing notes or any final tips to share?
So I guess I'll just repost. I have it in the I have it in the about page. Well, I'll just repost the link for the general guidance for Summer of Code in Octave. Well, actually, let me just I'll do that. So let's see. So that's the link, and I would say if you're interested in computing for again science or engineering or math, then you can explore Octave. And if you're interested in contributing, you can look at the Summer of Code page and then the contributing pages on the Octave wiki. And of course, you can also contribute to many other free projects. And I would encourage you to look at whichever ones you're interested in. And there's going to be a lot of similarities between projects, but you may find one that you're particularly drawn to. So just wanted to stop here and wish you all a good evening. It's morning here. And best wishes on your either Summer of Code or other summer activities that you might have.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining. I hope this was helpful. If you have any more questions, just feel free to comment, and Code for Cause team will try their best to answer those. And make sure you could join the next session as well. It's in half an hour. So see you guys. Thank you, and bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.